In 2008, LabMD was notified by a data remediation company saying that they had found one file with 9,000 of our patients on a peer-to-peer network. And that's all fancy wordsmithing to mean that they came into our workstation and took it. And they said it was available on that network because one of our workstations had LimeWire on it, and we didn't know that. It was installed before the employee that was using it was even employed. And we had no idea how it got there. We never discovered it. And it was against policy to use anything. And it was against policy to use it. So she was breaking policy, listening to music. Turned out that LimeWire is malware. It's been removed off the market. And it's been intended to dupe people into sharing things without their knowledge. And this one file got shared. This company went in and took it, and then they leveraged the fact that they took it into making us believe it could be out there elsewhere and wanting us to pay them $475 an hour to find it, remediate, see if it's out there. We didn't believe any of this because they wouldn't give us any information beforehand, and so we wouldn't hire them. And within a year, they had given it to the Federal Trade Commission. And in 2010, the Federal Trade Commission started investigating us. It seemed so strange there was a connection between those two. I found out that the CEO of this company, Robert Baubeck, had testified in front of Congress. When I was looking back into the research, I saw him in front of House Oversight, in front of House Commerce. He had Wesley Clark and his advisory board, Howard Schmidt, Poneman. They were on his advisory board, and I saw him testifying in front of Congress with Wesley Clark. And he was acting like the good guy. I felt like he was painting us in a corner and threatening us. And when the FTC called, they started investigating us, not him. And still, you want to just make the government go away. And we were cooperative for about a year and a half. But I saw this relationship they were all in, and I thought they were in bed, and I didn't think it was the up and up. So when they want us to sign a consent decree, being a medical facility that holds patients, and they're having no proof it had been out there, and we couldn't find anyone, and there are no victims, and it turned out only Tyversa took it, participating in this government-funded study. I thought this was completely bogus, and I wouldn't sign it, because when you are a medical facility and you have, people don't think you protect the patient data greatly, extremely well, perfectly, whatever, you're going to pay a big price. So I couldn't sign a consent decree. No one thinks that you've done nothing wrong if you sign a 20-year government agreement. So that made them very upset. And these bureaucrats do not like the word no. And I wrote a book about that, and that really stirred the hornet's nest. And it just kept escalating over the years. The battle started fighting in it because they kept ignoring the basic premise that I felt this was an entire bogus situation. And after the book came out, the pot was quite stirred, and then a whistleblower came out, so a former employee of Tyversa, validating what had happened, saying that they had made up IP addresses. He ended up getting criminal immunity from the Justice Department. There was a congressional investigation. I testified in front of House Oversight. And even with all that, the Federal Trade Commission would not back down. And so the judge really let him have it on the story that came out Friday. And so, you know, I speak because I want people to understand the overwhelming power of an agency to continue doing this and to double down, because people just don't push back. And that means I think they've gotten very lazy and very arrogant, and they've done tremendous damage to my company and my employees and patients because we're closed. The book is called The Devil Inside the Beltway because I was outraged of the powers that they had. I mean, here is a law that says it only has to be possible to happen, and there's no victims, and there doesn't have to be victims, and you're still guilty. So you could have something possible to happen and violate a law. When you come from the world of medicine, that is insanity. And the same thing with the world of technology. That's just crazy. And the fact that they would have such a little prosecutorial discretion and come after a medical facility that diagnoses cancer because they want more power in the cybersecurity space was appalling. But the truth of the matter is, the con was on, and people did not understand all the power these agencies had. And the existing system, I was guaranteed to lose. So I wrote the book because I wanted people to know that this is how outrageous this was. And if I had not written that book, the pot wouldn't have been stirred, the whistleblower wouldn't have come out, Congress wouldn't have known to investigate. I mean, that book was the rock thrown into the pond that created a whole lot of waves. And and that's a great thing about the First Amendment. I mean, to be able to talk about it. Now, you take a risk because you can look like a jerk. And I knew that I had to be very careful not looking like I was just screaming or throwing a temper tantrum. It had to be well written, well edited. It had to tell a story. People had to relate how it could impact their lives. You know, but cybersecurity is such a big thing right now. And really, I think the lesson is the FTC went after a company and several other companies without verifying evidence, which is shocking. And they've got incredible powers, and they're not sorry. And in cybersecurity right now, nothing's better. We have people that are not expert in cybersecurity trying to make law and enforce their policies. And you can only fight it if you're willing to go to court, spend millions, and stay in court for years. And that's terrifying. That has got to change. They should not be able to pummel you into submission just through intimidation. And that's what the FTC does with their consent decrees. They pummel you into submission. In my talk, I talk about the administrative law. The reason it's so powerful is because Congress and the judicial system have not allowed any intervention till it's finished. Well, that assumes ethical behavior. But when you empower someone with so much money, they're not ethical. They're bullying, they're intimidating, and you have no recourse. They have immunity. They have qualified immunity. Once they act as prosecutors, often they have absolute immunity. So, and they think they're saving the world. And they think you're collateral damage for a greater good. What happens is companies see that and they just roll over. And you just can't have that. This doesn't solve the problem of, when you have a bunch of innocent people, declaring guilt just to get you out of their hair so they can write you a check and make you go away, this isn't helping the fundamental problem in the country of having us more protected from cybercrime or getting companies to have better cybersecurity practices. The Federal Trade Commission is very big on punitive behavior. They are not a collaborative regulatory body. And being in medicine, I'm extremely used to collaboration. And what that would mean, they wouldn't have lawyers investigating us that are prosecutors. That's crazy. That's like a lawyer, prosecutor coming into your medical lab. We have technologists, pathologists, people trained in that world. But when you have just lawyers without education, medicine, and technology, and I don't mean a one-week course, and I don't mean one head guy in a Department of Technology. But you shouldn't have lawyers as investigators, period, doing this. Because they don't know what they don't know, and they wreaked so much damage. They harmed so many people with their clear buffoonery on this whole thing. What I've learned is that there's very little communication or understanding between agencies. There just isn't. And so when I tell agencies, just like when I was in Congress and I'm talking to Congress for months and months and months, what I learned was no one comes and tells Congress what the agencies are doing without a sense of panic, and people don't listen to panic. And so to have a clear, concise, conversation to educate them was very rare. And same thing between agencies. So through speaking and being out in the public and writing the book, I've talked to a lot of people in NSA, Homeland Security, CIA, FBI, that understand that this doesn't help in the bigger problem. And attacking victims, business victims, just because they're businesses, and acting like they're guilty when cybersecurity is exploding, we are so behind the curve as a country. It doesn't do any good to solve the fundamental problem. It just doesn't. It's just another notch on an investigator's belt. And then the FTC goes and pounds their chest to Congress. And for what? So, but so many people just sign and let them run. So I think that made me even more determined to have people understand what was going on, because I just don't see how it helps the country's safety, but from them behaving like that. Well, I think the odds of this happening to companies is extremely rare, number one. I mean, let's be realistic. The FTC chooses their victims carefully. And I think they chose us because we were small and they thought we were vulnerable to make a point. Because ultimately what the FTC wants to do is build a glossary of consent decrees that sort of cement itself in common law so that the courts don't intervene, Congress doesn't intervene, and they can just be on their own sort of free government. So what can companies do? Well, just understand that if they do knock on your door, they think you're guilty or they wouldn't be knocking. That the administrative court is not like normal court. They make up their own rules. They're allowed hearsay. They don't allow discovery. The lawyers that are investigators protect themselves with attorney-client privilege when they're not acting as lawyers in the investigative process. I mean, it is so stacked against you. The reason the ruling is so stunning is because the FTC has been allowed to make their own rules by Congress, because Congress doesn't pay they don't pay attention to what they're approving. They really don't. I mean, they listen to this sales pitch and they sign off on these rules, and the victims don't speak up. So what companies can really do is, look, just document, stay up to speed, and I think it's good within your industry to collaborate. But I also don't want to scare people. But the fact of the matter is that the Federal Trade Commission argues in court that they do not have to announce their standards. So you have an agency that is telling you, we're going to hold you accountable, but we're not going to tell you what we want. And we're not going to tell you what we want because we think that technology is changing so fast that it'll be outdated if we say that. And that is just lazy. In medicine, we change all the time, all over the place, constantly have been for over a century. It's still going to continue. Innovation change is a given, and that's no excuse to go on attack. But these are lawyers without technological training. These commissioners are lawyers without technological training. All they care about is the law. They don't care about morality or truth or justice, just the law. And that's what they think their job is. And within the law, I will fight back against that because I think it is terribly ineffective and very damaging. So what can a company do? No matter what you do, they can find something wrong. So don't think you can do anything for absolute security or absolute safety from the Federal Trade Commission. But you still should be intelligent with updating your equipment and updating your training your people and doing what LabMD did. That's part of the saga here, is that we did all those things for 2008. It doesn't matter. They attacked us that we didn't put WebSense in fast enough. We weren't fast enough because they don't understand that we had a complicated medical software platform that if we would have just yanked it down, the whole laboratory would have closed. But all they see is their point of view, and that's all they want to see. The FTC investigators are incredibly practiced at not asking questions, keeping silent, hiding. What they don't do, what they didn't do, is the more disturbing, like not verifying evidence. Things like that, they're very slick until they meet the judge. But to get to the judge took years and millions, and it shouldn't be that steep of a road. I think we need to step back and understand the administrative process was built a century ago because actually Woodrow Wilson wanted experts and not politicians regulating because things were so complex, as if they were so complex in 1915. That went on to the Roosevelt era. And the big problem they did is they didn't understand the Constitution, and they allowed the separation of powers to be removed. Agencies should exist, they should have regulatory power, but they should not be prosecutor, judge, and jury. And due process and getting your day in court years later after you're dead is not access to justice. And the judicial system seems to think it is. The fact that they get to ride you through an administrative process and drain you dry so that by the time you get to a judge, you're so weak. And Supreme Court rulings have said they have to be given wide deference, is open season on bullying. And that's who the FTC is. They are bullies. And a lot of agencies are bullies because we've created them. We've allowed them that power. And so we have to understand that we have to just I think, take away their courts so that it has to be outside to an Article III judge. And a lot of these problems will evaporate because they will have accountability. Right now, they don't have accountability. The commissioners don't even really know what the investigators do till the case is brought to them. There's no listening to anyone else till it's over. You know, by the time the Federal Trade Commission was ready to sue me, they had been so appalling in their behavior, gamesmanship, dishonesty, that I was not going to sit down with them. I mean, it's a mockery. And it took a long time to prove that. And it's important for other people to know because they have power, all of us in cybersecurity. It's not important for people to know because they have some pity party for LabMD. But for the grace of God, go I. So you should, take this as a cautionary tale because this can happen to you. They're not remorseful. They will go just to dead silence. That's what they do. They're very trained in this, PR, public interaction manipulation. They're very sensitive to criticism. They like to see themselves as the saviors of everyone. And but their behavior needs to be exposed. I'm just exposing what they did, and the judge heartily agrees. And it really boils down to power without knowledge is what it boils down to.